This is a fictional American romance story created using AI for entertainment purposes only, intended strictly for audiences 18 years and older and not suitable for children under 18.
The rain started before dawn and showed no intention of stopping. Seattle wore grief well. Low clouds pressed down like a ceiling too close to breathe under, and the streets glistened with that permanent sheen of wet asphalt and reflected headlights. Nathaniel Brooks stood in his driveway holding a cardboard box that had once contained imported Italian tiles. Now it held 10 years of marriage. The box wasn't heavy. That was the first thing that surprised him. 10 years, he thought, should weigh more. Inside were wedding albums, loose photographs, a silver frame Eleanor had insisted on buying from a boutique they couldn't afford at the time. He hadn't opened the box since pulling it from the closet an hour ago. He hadn't needed to. He knew what was in there. Proof. Evidence. Artifacts from a life that, as of last Tuesday at 4:12 p.m., no longer existed. Nathaniel walked to the curb and set the box beside the trash bin. The lid remained open. He didn't bother closing it. The photographs inside were already curling slightly from the damp air. Through the kitchen window, the house looked staged like a real estate listing. Stainless steel appliances, minimalist decor, clean counters. No trace of Eleanor. She had packed efficiently. That was Eleanor's way. Even betrayal, apparently, could be done with professional neatness. Nathaniel checked his watch. The garbage truck would arrive in 9 minutes. He told himself he would not look inside the box again. He lasted 3. Something, not emotion, not nostalgia, just a restless irritation made him crouch down and flip open the first album. The leather cover creaked faintly. He remembered that sound. He had complained about it when they bought it. "You're criticizing a photo album?" Eleanor had laughed. "It's overpriced," he'd said. "You're impossible." He turned the first page. There they were, smiling, symmetrical, curated. The kind of happiness people trusted because it photographed well. Nathaniel felt nothing. He kept turning pages. Ceremony, vows, rings, applause, champagne, the choreography of commitment. Still nothing. Then a loose photograph slipped free and fell onto the wet pavement. Nathaniel sighed, picked it up, and paused. It was from the reception. He remembered the moment vaguely. Someone had just made a toast. People were laughing. He had been looking at the speaker, but Eleanor wasn't. She was looking at him. Not smiling at the camera, not posing. Looking directly at him. Nathaniel frowned. There was something strange about her expression. Not sadness, not joy. Something more fragile. As if she were studying him. As if she were trying to memorize something that was already leaving. A drop of rain struck the photograph. He wiped it away with his thumb. He didn't remember that look. He was certain he would have remembered. Another car passed. Tires hissed against wet pavement. Somewhere down the block, a garage door opened and closed. Ordinary sounds. Tuesday morning sounds. Nathaniel looked back into the box. He told himself he was only checking whether the photos were getting ruined by the rain. That was all. He lifted out a second album, and then a third. Minutes passed unnoticed. The garbage truck turned onto the street with a hydraulic groan, stopping house by house in mechanical rhythm. When it reached Nathaniel's driveway, the sanitation worker stepped down, glanced at the open box, and hesitated. "You want this taken?" the man called. Nathaniel opened his mouth. He looked at the photograph again, Eleanor's eyes frozen in that unreadable expression. "No," Nathaniel said, surprising himself. "Not that." The worker shrugged, climbed back aboard, and the truck moved on. Nathaniel stood alone in the rain, holding a version of his wife he suddenly realized he had never actually seen. And for the first time since discovering the affair, the anger loosened just enough to make room for something far more unsettling. Doubt. Not about what she had done, but about everything that had come before it. He carried the box back inside. The house no longer looked staged. It looked unfinished. Like a conversation interrupted mid-sentence. Nathaniel set the photographs on the dining table, pulled out a chair, and sat down slowly, the way one does in a room where someone has just said something irreversible. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, he began to look. Not at the betrayal, but at the years he had never truly examined. Nathaniel did not turn on the overhead lights. The gray morning was enough. Seattle's filtered daylight slipped through the wide kitchen windows, flattening everything into muted tones. The walnut table, the pale walls, the stack of photographs spread before him like evidence in a quiet investigation. The house carried a hollow acoustics now. Even small movements seemed louder, as though the rooms themselves were aware someone was missing. He made coffee out of habit, not desire. It went cold beside him, untouched. Nathaniel picked up the first photograph again, the one from the reception. Eleanor's gaze still held him, frozen in that unguarded second. He studied the angle of her shoulders, the way her hand rested against the stem of her glass, fingers not quite relaxed. He had spent years reading blueprints, noticing structural tensions invisible to anyone else. Load-bearing stress, hairline fractures, misalignments that foretold collapse. Now that same instinct turned against his own life. He reached for another photo. In this one, they were cutting the cake. Guests blurred behind them in laughter. Nathaniel remembered the joke someone had made about smashing frosting into each other's faces. He had refused. Too messy, too performative. Eleanor was smiling, but not at him. Her smile seemed delayed, like an echo arriving half a second too late. Her eyes weren't engaged. They were searching, not for the camera, but for something just beyond the frame. Nathaniel leaned back. "I was right there," he murmured aloud, though no one could hear him. "Why does it look like I wasn't?" The question lingered longer than he expected. He stood, walked to the hallway closet, and returned with another box. Not photographs this time, but old documents Eleanor had insisted on saving. Travel itineraries, birthday cards, playbills, printed emails from a time when she still believed in archiving memories. Nathaniel used to tease her about it. "Cloud storage exists, Ellie." "And clouds disappear," she'd replied. "Paper stays." He opened an envelope at random. Inside was a postcard from a weekend trip to Napa Valley, 5 years earlier. The message on the back was written in Eleanor's looping handwriting. "You spent half the morning answering work calls, but the other half, you laughed. I'll take the half." Nathaniel frowned. He didn't remember taking work calls. He didn't remember laughing either. He set the card down and reached for his laptop. A few keystrokes pulled up archived calendars. Nathaniel scrolled back months, years, watching his past reorganize itself into color-coded blocks of obligation. Meetings, site visits, deadlines, conferences, flights. The Napa weekend appeared. Saturday, 7:30 a.m., client call, rescheduled twice. 9 a.m., revised structural review, remote. Nathaniel stared at the screen. He had worked. On their anniversary trip. A slow discomfort settled in, not guilt exactly, but recognition. Like hearing a recording of your own voice and realizing it sounds nothing like you imagined. Behind him, the refrigerator hummed steadily. Time passed unnoticed. He returned to the photographs with new attention. Now he wasn't looking for happiness. He was looking for absence. In picture after picture, he began to see it. Eleanor leaning slightly toward him while he faced forward, already distracted. Eleanor watching him speak to someone else, her expression patient, almost rehearsed. Eleanor mid-laugh, eyes flicking toward him as if checking whether he was sharing the moment. And Nathaniel, always composed, always upright, always presentable, always elsewhere. By noon, the dining table had disappeared beneath rows of images arranged in chronological lines, a timeline of erosion. Nathaniel rubbed his temples. His mind resisted what it was assembling. "She cheated," he said quietly, trying to anchor himself to the one fact that felt solid. That's the story. But the photographs refused to cooperate. They told a longer story, one without a clear villain. His phone buzzed. A message from a colleague lit the screen. "Need your input on the Mercer redesign." Nathaniel stared at it until the screen went dark again. For the first time in decades, he did not respond. Across the room, a narrow bookshelf held Eleanor's old journals. He had never read them. Not out of respect, out of disinterest. They belonged to a world of feelings he trusted her to manage alone. Now they looked less like private objects and more like locked rooms in a house he thought he owned. Nathaniel approached slowly, as if they might accuse him. He pulled one free. 2019. The year before everything he had once believed began to go wrong. He opened to a random page. "I don't think Nathaniel is unhappy," she had written. "That would be easier to understand. He's just somewhere else. Like he lives in a future that hasn't happened yet." Nathaniel swallowed. Another entry months later. "Today we had dinner together. I tried not to mention how long it's been since we talked without his phone on the table. I don't want to sound like I'm asking for too much. I just want to feel like we're in the same room." He closed the journal abruptly. The air felt thinner. Nathaniel walked back to the table and looked again at the photograph that had started all of this. Eleanor, watching him. Not with resentment, not with boredom, with effort. As if loving him had already required work he never noticed. Nathaniel sank into the chair. The affair still hurt sharp, undeniable, but now it existed alongside another realization, quieter and far more destabilizing. He did not know when their marriage had begun to fail, because he had not been paying attention when it did. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Light shifted, faint but perceptible, casting longer reflections across the photographs. Nathaniel gathered them carefully this time, not discarding, not preserving, studying, trying to understand the shape of something that had not broken all at once, but worn down slowly, invisibly, like stone under constant water. And somewhere within that understanding, another question began to form. Not about Eleanor, about the man she had been trying to reach. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped entirely. Seattle did what it often did after a storm, pretended nothing had happened. A pale strip of sunlight pushed through the clouds, turning the wet streets reflective, almost cinematic. The kind of light Nathaniel used to admire through office windows without ever stepping outside to feel it. He hadn't gone to the office that day. At first, he told himself it was because he needed time to handle the divorce logistics. Emails to lawyers, financial documents, practical things. But he hadn't opened a single legal file. Instead, Nathaniel sat in his study, surrounded by ghosts made of data. His laptop screen displayed a decade-old inbox resurrected from an archive he had not touched in years. Tens of thousands of messages. Most of them were from contractors, clients, engineers, city officials. And threaded between them, like thin veins of something living, were emails from Eleanor. He clicked one at random. Subject: lunch? Date: March 14th, 2018. "You're downtown today, right? I could meet you between meetings. Even 20 minutes would be nice." Nathaniel searched his memory. Nothing. He checked his reply. "Can't today. Deadline moved up. Rain check?" He opened the calendar from that same day. The moved-up deadline had been a meeting he himself requested. Nathaniel leaned back slowly. Another email. Subject: "No reason. Just wanted to tell you I miss you. That's all." No reply from him. He didn't remember seeing it. A small chill crept into his shoulders, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a growing sense of imbalance, like standing in a building whose foundation had shifted without warning. Nathaniel opened a voicemail archive next. His phone had automatically backed them up over the years. He rarely listened to them. Most had been transcribed by software and skimmed quickly between meetings. He pressed play on one from 2020. Eleanor's voice filled the quiet room. "Hey, it's me. You're probably still at work. I was just leaving the grocery store and saw those blood oranges you like. They looked terrible, actually." A soft laugh. "I didn't buy them. Anyway, call me when you're done. We haven't talked today." The message lasted only 22 seconds. Nathaniel stared at the waveform on the screen after it ended. He had no recollection of that call. He checked the transcript history. Marked as read, no return call logged. Another voicemail. "Nathaniel, I know you're busy. I just wanted to hear your voice for a minute. That's all." "Okay. Good luck with the presentation tomorrow." Another. "I think we're living on different schedules. Maybe this weekend we could reset?" another. No accusation, no anger, just attempts. Small bridges extended again and again over a widening gap. Nathaniel pushed away from the desk and stood, suddenly restless. He walked into the kitchen, then back again, as if movement might rearrange what he was learning. It didn't. He had always believed their marriage was stable because it lacked conflict. But stability, he now realized, was sometimes just silence no one challenged. Nathaniel returned to the computer and opened their shared calendar, the one Eleanor used to color code with cheerful labels he used to find unnecessary. Blue for his commitments, yellow for hers, green for things she called us. At first, the green entries appeared regularly. Dinner reservations, movie nights, weekend drives, even reminders like no phones tonight. Over time, the green blocks became sparse, then occasional, then gone entirely, replaced by more blue, always more blue. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He found the last green entry, April 7th, 2022. Talk, really talk. There were no notes attached, no follow-up, no rescheduling. He opened his work calendar from that same day. 3 consecutive meetings. He had stayed late at the office. Nathaniel closed his eyes. He remembered that night now vaguely. He'd come home exhausted, found Eleanor already asleep on the couch, television still glowing. He'd carried his laptop upstairs instead of waking her. At the time, it had felt considerate. Now it felt like absence disguised as kindness. The realization didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It accumulated, piece by piece, like discovering you'd been misreading a map for years. Nathaniel sat down again, slower this time, as if the chair required negotiation. He whispered into the empty room, testing the words. She didn't leave all at once. And then, after a long pause, I wasn't there long before she did. The truth didn't absolve Eleanor, but it rearranged the emotional landscape. The affair was no longer a sudden collapse. It was the final, visible crack in something that had already been failing under strain neither of them named. Nathaniel looked around the study at the awards on the wall, the framed project renderings, the symbols of the life he had built so carefully. He had designed structures meant to last 50 years, and neglected the one thing that required daily maintenance. His phone buzzed again. Another message from work. Then another. Nathaniel silenced it. For once, urgency belonged somewhere else. On the desk, Eleanor's final voicemail, the last one she had left before everything unraveled, waited unopened. The timestamp was just 3 weeks old. Nathaniel hovered over the play button. He hadn't listened to it yet. He wasn't sure he deserved to, but he pressed play anyway. The voicemail did not contain a confession. It did not contain an apology either. Nathaniel, Eleanor's voice said, quieter than usual, as if she were speaking from somewhere small. I think I'm disappearing in this marriage. And I don't know how to tell you that without sounding dramatic. I don't want to fight. I just want us to notice each other again. Call me when you can. The message ended there. No accusation, no ultimatum, just a statement that had gone unanswered. Nathaniel listened to it twice, then a third time. He tried to summon anger, something clean and directional, something that would let him hold on to the version of events he had clung to all week. Wife betrays husband, marriage ends, story over. But anger required simplicity, and nothing felt simple anymore. By evening, the sky had cleared into that brief, fragile blue Seattle sometimes allowed before nightfall. Nathaniel found himself doing something he would have considered unthinkable days earlier. He searched for Julian, not in the frantic way of a wronged spouse looking for ammunition, but with the uneasy focus of someone trying to understand an unfamiliar variable in an already complex equation. Julian Alvarez, freelance photographer. Commercial work, mostly. Lifestyle campaigns. Environmental portraits. A website filled with soft, natural light and people caught mid-expression. Not posed, not polished. Observed. Nathaniel clicked through the portfolio slowly. Julian's photographs were intimate without being intrusive. A woman tying her hair before stepping into a meeting. A father crouching to speak to his child at eye level. An older couple standing in a kitchen, not touching, but clearly connected by the quiet space between them. They were not the kind of images Nathaniel would have commissioned. They weren't about structure. They were about presence. Nathaniel leaned back, unsettled by the realization that Julian's work seemed to value exactly the kind of moments Nathaniel had spent years overlooking. There was an email address listed under Contact. Nathaniel stared at it for a long time. Then, before he could overthink the decision, he typed, "We need to talk. Not to argue, just to understand. Nathaniel Brooks." He expected no reply. One came 20 minutes later. "I was wondering when you'd reach out. There's a cafe on Pine, tomorrow morning, if you want." No defensiveness, no challenge, just agreement. The cafe was narrow and crowded, filled with laptop screens and the low murmur of people pretending not to eavesdrop on one another. Nathaniel arrived early, choosing a table near the window. He wasn't sure whether that was strategic or instinctive. He only knew he needed space to breathe. Julian walked in exactly at 9. Nathaniel recognized him immediately, though not from the way he'd imagined during those first furious days. Julian wasn't imposing. He wasn't slick or arrogant. He looked ordinary. Dark hair slightly unkempt, denim jacket, camera bag slung across his shoulder like an extension of himself rather than an accessory. He scanned the room, spotted Nathaniel, and approached with cautious neutrality. "Mr. Brooks." "Nathaniel," he corrected automatically. Julian nodded. "Nathaniel." They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of milk steaming and ceramic cups clinking filled the gap. Nathaniel studied him, searching for signs of guilt, triumph, discomfort. He found none of the ones he expected. Julian looked like a man prepared to accept whatever came. "I'm not here to fight," Nathaniel said finally. "I didn't think you were." The lack of tension in Julian's voice was disorienting. Nathaniel folded his hands. "When did you meet her?" Julian didn't hesitate. "Last year, October. A campaign shoot for a healthcare nonprofit. She was the marketing lead." Nathaniel tried to place October. He saw flashes of deadlines, travel, a conference in Chicago, long days, later nights. "She talked about you," Julian added. Nathaniel looked up sharply. "Not the way you're thinking," Julian said. "She didn't complain. She explained you. Like she was trying to make sure I understood the version of you she still believed in." That landed harder than any accusation could have. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "When did it become more than work?" Julian's gaze shifted briefly to the window before returning. "Not for a while. At first, she just stayed late after meetings. We'd talk. About architecture, actually. About how you saw the world. She admired that." Nathaniel almost laughed at the irony. "She said you could walk into an empty lot and already see the finished building," Julian continued. "But she wasn't sure you could see things that didn't come with plans." Silence stretched between them. Nathaniel expected resentment hearing another man speak so personally about his marriage. Instead, he felt something closer to recognition. "What changed?" Nathaniel asked. Julian considered the question carefully. "She told me one night," he said, "that she felt like she was living beside you, not with you. That she kept trying to get your attention without interrupting your life. She didn't want to be another demand." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, not in anger and memory. He could suddenly picture Eleanor hovering in doorways, starting sentences she never finished. "I didn't pursue her," Julian added quietly. "If anything, I kept telling her to talk to you." Nathaniel met his eyes. "Did she?" "I think she tried. I think she got tired of trying alone." The words settled heavily, but not cruelly. Nathaniel looked around the cafe. Conversations layered over one another, people leaning forward, listening, responding. Presence, he thought. So ordinary, so easy to assume it would always be there. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Julian said. "And I'm not asking you to understand what happened between us. But this didn't start as an escape. It started as two people noticing each other in the same room." Nathaniel absorbed that. Not seduction, not conspiracy, recognition. He stood after a while, unsure how long they had been talking. Julian rose too. Nathaniel extended his hand. The gesture surprised them both. Julian shook it. There was no resolution in the handshake, no reconciliation, just acknowledgement of damage, of complexity, of the uncomfortable humanity shared among all three of them. As Nathaniel stepped back out into the cool morning air, the city felt different than it had days ago. Less like a stage where something had been stolen from him, more like a place where something had slowly gone missing and no one had known how to say so. He walked without direction, hands in his coat pockets, carrying not closure, but a question that refused to settle. If the marriage hadn't been destroyed by one moment, when had they begun losing it? That night, Nathaniel did not turn on the television. He had tried, briefly, the screen filled with the familiar glow of streaming menus, recommended shows, algorithmic suggestions, stories designed to distract. After a few seconds, he turned it off again. Noise felt dishonest. Instead, he walked through the house, not aimlessly, not nostalgically, methodically, as if surveying a structure after discovering foundational damage. The living room still bore Eleanor's influence in ways he had never consciously registered. The uneven stack of design magazines she never threw away, the throw blanket she insisted made the space look lived in, the ceramic bowl by the door meant for keys he rarely remembered to place there. Nathaniel used to move through these rooms the way one moves through a hotel, functional, temporary, certain everything would remain as he left it. Now he saw fingerprints of intention everywhere. He stopped at the bookshelf and ran a hand along its surface. Eleanor had arranged it by color once. He'd reorganized it by height because it looked cleaner. At the time, it had seemed logical. Now it felt like a small act of erasure. Memory, Nathaniel realized, had always presented itself to him as efficiency. Truth was messier. The first flashback came not as a dramatic recollection, but as a sensory fragment. Saw dust, late afternoon sunlight. Eleanor standing in the doorway of his old studio apartment, years before the promotions, before the house, before the routines calcified. "You're still working?" she had asked gently. "I'm close to finishing this model," Nathaniel replied without looking up. "Just another hour." She smiled. "You said that 2 hours ago." He remembered feeling mildly irritated, not at her, but at the interruption of momentum. "I want to get it right," he said. Eleanor stepped inside, studying the miniature structure on his desk. "You always do." There had been admiration in her voice. He had heard expectation. The memory shifted. Another scene surfaced. Their third anniversary. Eleanor had made reservations at a small waterfront restaurant. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes late, tie loosened, apology already prepared. Traffic was impossible. "It's okay," she said quickly. Too quickly. He launched into a story about a project delay, about a contractor who'd misread a specification. Eleanor nodded, listening. At least, he had thought she was listening. Now, replaying the moment, Nathaniel saw what he hadn't noticed then. She had stopped eating, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to finish. He never asked about her day. The memory skipped ahead to the check arriving, to him glancing at his phone, to Eleanor watching the harbor alone while he typed. At the time, he had believed they shared a quiet evening together. In truth, he had been accompanied by work. Nathaniel sat down at the dining table again, letting the recollections come without resisting them. They did not accuse, they accumulated. A Saturday morning, Eleanor suggested they drive out of the city. "I have site revisions due Monday," he'd answered. "We could go just for a few hours. I'll be distracted the whole time." She had nodded, masking disappointment with practicality. "Next weekend, then." Next weekend never came. Another memory. Eleanor standing beside him at a colleague's holiday party. "You disappear at these things," she teased. "I'm networking. You talk to everyone except me. I see you at home." The moment had passed in laughter, but now Nathaniel heard the unintended message inside his own words. "I see you at home." As if presence were guaranteed, as if intimacy required no effort. The realization did not absolve the affair. It did something worse. It removed the illusion that betrayal had arrived from nowhere. Nathaniel stood and walked into the kitchen, suddenly unable to sit still. The clock above the stove ticked with mechanical indifference, time continuing as it always did, regardless of who kept up with it. He opened the refrigerator and stared inside without purpose. Eleanor used to leave notes on the middle shelf. "Eat something green today. Don't work past midnight. Reminder, you're human." He used to roll his eyes at them. He wondered now when she had stopped writing them. The house held no answer. Nathaniel closed the refrigerator and leaned both hands against the counter, head lowered. For years, he had believed love meant building something stable enough that it would not require constant attention. But stability, he now understood, was not the absence of change. It was maintenance, daily, unremarkable, mutual. And he had mistaken endurance for connection. Later, he found himself standing in the doorway of their bedroom, her side now bare, the imprint of her absence sharper than any object left behind. On the nightstand, one thing remained, a framed photograph he had somehow overlooked. Not from their wedding, not from an event, just a candid shot taken years ago. Eleanor sitting cross-legged on the floor, assembling a bookshelf they'd ordered online, looking up mid-laugh, hair falling across her face, unaware of the camera. He remembered taking that picture. He had almost deleted it because the composition wasn't balanced. Eleanor had insisted they keep it. "It's real," she'd said. Nathaniel picked up the frame. For the first time, he understood what she had meant. Not perfect, not structured, but alive. He set the photograph back down carefully, no longer certain whether he was preserving a memory or acknowledging a truth he had spent years editing out. The marriage hadn't shattered. It had worn away, moment by moment, choice by choice, until there was enough distance for someone else to step into the space they had left unguarded. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding settling into something quieter than regret. Responsibility. Not for everything, but for more than he had ever allowed himself to see. And with that recognition came a new, unavoidable step. He needed to speak to Eleanor. Not to argue, not to repair, but to finally have the conversation they had postponed for years. Nathaniel sent the message at 7:12 a.m. "Can we meet? Not to argue, not to fix anything. I just want to talk." He read it twice before pressing send, aware of how unfamiliar the words felt. For years, most of his messages to Eleanor had been logistical. Running late, pick up dry cleaning, flight delayed. This one contained no instructions, no efficiency, just uncertainty. Her reply came an hour later. "Okay, same place we used to go?" Nathaniel understood immediately. The park by Lake Union. They hadn't been there in years. The morning air carried that late autumn sharpness that made everything feel clearer than it really was. The sky was pale, the water calm, the distant hum of traffic softened by distance. Nathaniel arrived first. He stood near the wooden bench where they used to sit on Sunday mornings, drinking coffee and watching seaplanes skim across the surface. Back then, they had called it their pause button, a place where neither of them was supposed to talk about work. Somehow, they had stopped coming. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Eleanor approached slowly, hands tucked into the pockets of a wool coat he didn't recognize. She looked thinner. Not fragile, just altered, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally set it down, only to discover the weight had changed her posture. They stopped a few feet apart. No one reached for the other. "Hi," she said. "Hi." The word felt insufficient for 10 years of shared life and several weeks of separation, but neither of them tried to improve it. They sat on the bench with a careful space between them. For a while, they watched the water. Nathaniel realized this might be the first time in years they had been quiet together without one of them trying to fill the silence. "I met Julian," he said finally. Eleanor nodded. She didn't look surprised. "I figured you might." "I didn't go there to confront him. I know," she said softly. "You're not that kind of angry." Nathaniel almost smiled at that, the accuracy of it. "I'm not here to talk about him," he added. "Not really." Eleanor turned slightly toward him, waiting. Nathaniel struggled to begin. He had rehearsed sentences in his head, but now they felt rehearsed too polished for what this moment required. "I've been going through old things," he said instead. "Emails, photos, your journals." She didn't react with defensiveness. Only a small exhale. "Then you know," she said. "I know parts," Nathaniel replied. Enough to realize this didn't happen suddenly. The word affair remained unspoken between them. Not avoided, just unnecessary. Eleanor clasped her hands together, studying them as if they belonged to someone else. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray you," she said, "if that's what you were wondering." "I know. That almost makes it worse," she added, her voice steady but thin. "Because it means I watched us disappear and didn't know how to stop it." Nathaniel absorbed that quietly. I thought we were stable, he admitted. No fights, no drama. I thought that meant we were okay. Eleanor gave a faint, sad smile. We weren't fighting because I didn't think you had room for it. He looked at her. You should have told me. I tried. The words were not sharp, just factual. Nathaniel nodded. I see that now. A jogger passed behind them. Somewhere across the lake, a plane engine roared to life. Ordinary sounds, indifferent to the gravity of their conversation. I kept thinking, Eleanor continued, that if I just adjusted, if I didn't demand too much, if I let you focus on your work, we'd find our way back naturally, like we were just in a busy season. Nathaniel let out a slow breath. There was always another busy season. Yes. They sat with that truth. No one rushed to soften it. I didn't fall in love with Julian because he was better than you, Eleanor said after a moment. I fell in love with the feeling of being seen again. That's different. But it still hurt you the same. Nathaniel appreciated that she didn't try to excuse it. I wasn't there, he said, not the way I thought I was. Eleanor looked at him then fully, directly, and for a second he saw the same expression from the wedding photograph, that mixture of care and distance. We both stayed, she said, even when we were already lonely. That's on both of us. The honesty landed without resistance. Nathaniel realized this was what he had come for, not apology, not reconciliation, clarity. Do you regret it? He asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. I regret that we lost each other long before we admitted it, she said. I regret hurting you. I don't regret realizing I couldn't keep living invisible. Nathaniel nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said, and meant it. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of the water. After a while, Eleanor asked, What happens now? Nathaniel looked out at the lake. I think, he said, choosing each word deliberately, we stop pretending this is something we can repair by going back. There isn't a back anymore. Eleanor's shoulders relaxed, not in relief, but in acceptance. No, she agreed, there isn't. They sat there a little longer, not as husband and wife trying to salvage something, but as two people finally acknowledging the full shape of what they had shared and what they had lost. When they stood, there was no dramatic goodbye, just a pause. Take care of yourself, Nathaniel, Eleanor said. You too, Ellie. She turned and walked away. Nathaniel watched until she disappeared into the movement of the city. It hurt, but it was a clean kind of hurt now. Not confusion, not anger, understanding. And understanding, he realized, was its own kind of ending. The conversation at the lake should have felt like closure. Instead, it followed Nathaniel home. Not as noise, but as presence. Something seated quietly across from him at the kitchen table, waiting to be acknowledged. The kind of presence he had ignored for years, mistaking silence for absence. That night, he did something unfamiliar. He allowed himself to feel the loss without trying to categorize it. Not betrayal, not failure, not even divorce. Grief. Not just for the marriage that ended, but for the version of it that had once been possible. 3 days later, Eleanor asked if she could come by to pick up the last of her things. Nathaniel almost suggested leaving them in boxes by the door. That would have been easier, cleaner. Instead, he said, I'll be here. When she arrived, the air between them was different from the tension of previous weeks. Still careful, still fragile, but no longer defensive. They moved through the house together, gathering the remaining fragments of her life there. A winter coat from the hallway closet, a stack of books she had lent to herself and never retrieved, a mug with a chipped handle Nathaniel had tried to throw away once and Eleanor had rescued. You always hated this one, she said, noticing him glance at it. It leaked, he replied. It just needed to be held a certain way. Nathaniel almost laughed at the unintended metaphor. They carried the box to the dining table, where the photographs still lay in careful stacks. Eleanor paused when she saw them. You kept them, she said quietly. I almost didn't. She looked at him, waiting. Nathaniel picked up the reception photo, the one where she was looking at him. This is the one that stopped me. Eleanor took it from him. For a long moment, she didn't speak. I remember this, she said at last. That was when I realized I was already afraid. Afraid of what? That we were becoming polite strangers, she answered. That if I didn't try harder to reach you, we'd just continue like that forever. Nathaniel absorbed the words slowly. I thought if I was patient, she continued, you'd notice. That once things settled at work, we'd find each other again. I thought I was doing everything for us, Nathaniel said. I know you did. That was the tragedy of it. Neither of them had intended harm. They had simply loved in ways that stopped intersecting. Eleanor set the photograph down carefully, as if returning something fragile to its place. I didn't want to replace you, she said, her voice steady but softer now. Julian wasn't a substitute. He was where I ended up after feeling alone for too long. That doesn't justify it, but it's the truth. Nathaniel nodded. I understand that now, he said. What I didn't understand was how long you'd been grieving before anything actually ended. Eleanor's expression shifted surprise, then recognition. Yes, she whispered. I think I started mourning us while we were still married. The admission lingered between them, heavy but honest. Nathaniel realized grief hadn't arrived for both of them at the same time. She had lived inside it quietly. He was only entering it now. I wish I had known, he said. I wish I had known how to make you see, she replied. They stood there, not trying to repair the past, but finally witnessing it together. The missed signals, the unspoken disappointments, the gradual reshaping of love into something unrecognizable. Shared responsibility didn't lessen the pain, but it changed its shape. No longer a wound inflicted by one person onto another, more like something they had both unknowingly allowed to fade. Eleanor closed the last box. I think this is everything. Nathaniel walked her to the door. For a moment, neither moved to open it. I don't hate you, he said, the words surprising even himself. I don't hate you either, Eleanor replied. I never did. That, perhaps, was the saddest part. They had not destroyed each other. They had simply failed to hold on. Nathaniel opened the door. Cool air drifted inside, carrying the faint scent of rain. Eleanor stepped out, then paused on the threshold. I hope, she said, next time you let someone see you while you're building your life. Not after. Nathaniel considered that. I hope next time, he answered, you don't try to disappear just to keep the peace. She gave a small, genuine smile. Then she left. Nathaniel stood there long after her car pulled away, understanding that grief was not just about losing someone. It was about finally seeing what had been there all along and knowing you hadn't known how to protect it. Behind him, the house was quieter than it had ever been. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like space. Space to learn. Space to change. Space to remember without rewriting. On the dining table, one photograph remained separate from the others, waiting. Winter arrived quietly. In Seattle, it rarely announced itself with snow. Instead, it came as longer nights, colder rain, and a softness in the air that made everything feel slightly suspended, as if the city itself were taking a breath it did not intend to release too quickly. 3 months had passed. Nathaniel no longer measured time by the day he discovered the affair. He measured it by smaller, less dramatic changes. The first weekend, he left his phone in another room without feeling anxious. The first dinner he cooked without automatically setting out 2 plates. The first evening, he noticed the sunset because he was actually looking at it. Grief had not vanished. It had settled, no longer sharp, but present in the way an old scar exists. Not painful, just part of the body. The house had changed, though not in the way people might expect after a separation. Nathaniel had not renovated, had not replaced furniture, had not stripped away Eleanor's influence as if cleansing a wound. He had simply adjusted. Some things remained exactly where they had always been. Others, he moved slowly, deliberately not to erase her, but to make room for himself as he was now. He understood, finally, that pretending those 10 years had never existed would not make him whole. It would only make him dishonest. One afternoon, while reorganizing the study, Nathaniel found the box of photographs again. He had not opened it since Eleanor's last visit. For a long moment, he considered leaving it closed. Then he carried it to the dining table and sat down. This time, there was no investigation, no searching for clues, no need to reinterpret every detail. He flipped through the images calmly, not as evidence, but as memories. Some warm, some uncomfortable, all real. He saw the younger versions of themselves, trying, failing, adjusting, misunderstanding, loving imperfectly. He saw who he had been, ambitious, certain, distracted. He saw who Eleanor had been, patient, hopeful, gradually tired. Nathaniel did not judge either of them as harshly now. They had not known what they did not know, and by the time they did, it had already changed them. At the bottom of the box lay the photograph, the one from their wedding reception, Eleanor looking at him, not the camera. Nathaniel studied it again, but it no longer felt like a mystery to solve. He understood that expression now. It was not fear of the future. It was the fragile awareness that love required attention and the quiet worry that attention could be lost. At the time, he had missed it entirely. Now, it felt like a message delivered late but still meaningful. Nathaniel stood, walked to the bookshelf in the living room, and cleared a small space between two volumes of architectural theory. He placed the photograph there. Not prominently displayed, not hidden, simply present. A part of the room. A part of the story. Later that evening, Nathaniel sat by the window with a notebook open beside him. Not work notes, not project sketches, just thoughts. He had begun writing occasionally, not for publication, not even to reread, but to practice noticing things. What the day felt like. What he had almost overlooked. He wrote, "Structures fail when stress goes unacknowledged." Then, after a pause, "So do people." He closed the notebook. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, reflecting off wet pavement. Someone across the street laughed. A bus exhaled air at the corner. Life, unremarkable and continuous, moved forward without waiting for anyone to resolve their past. Nathaniel no longer needed it to wait. Weeks later, a colleague invited him to a small gathering. Nothing formal, just a few people, conversation, food that would probably be ordered rather than cooked. Nathaniel almost declined out of habit. Then he didn't. He stood in his bedroom, adjusting his coat, catching sight of the living room through the open door. The photograph remained on the shelf, unchanged. He didn't look at it with longing. He looked at it the way one looks at an old map, not to return, but to understand the terrain already traveled. The marriage had ended. The love, in its time, had been real. Both truths could exist without canceling each other. Nathaniel turned off the lights and stepped outside into the cold evening air. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing somewhere. He was simply going. And that, he realized, was enough.